Some people run countries, others run entire empires, and a shocking number of them had daily habits so bizarre, obsessive, or unhinged that if a normal person did the same thing, they'd be locked in a room and studied. This video is a collection of real historical leaders and the private routines they hid from the public, because power doesn't just change decisions, it quietly breaks the mind. 1. Joseph Stalin was a terrifying figure, but his morning routine was basically a slapstick comedy sketch that makes absolutely zero medical sense. Every single day, the Soviet leader would take fresh lemon juice and squeeze it directly into his actual eyeballs because he genuinely believed the stinging acid improved his vision. It is the medical equivalent of hitting your toe with a hammer to cure a headache. Just picture his terrified servants having to stand there in silence, watching the most powerful man in the USSR wincing in self-inflicted pain, tears streaming down his face, only for him to wipe his eyes red and go act like a tough guy. He would send scientists to the Gulag for disagreeing with him on biology, but he never once stopped to think that burning his own corneas with citrus fruit was a really stupid idea. 2. King Farooq of Egypt had unlimited access to gold and palaces, but he developed a compulsive habit of stealing random junk from his guests, like a petty criminal at a mall. He was a literal kleptomaniac who famously swiped a pocket watch right out of Winston Churchill's jacket during a diplomatic dinner. When Churchill noticed it was missing, Farooq awkwardly pretended he had found it on the floor. But it gets dumber because he actually hired a professional pickpocket to give him private lessons on how to steal wallets and lighters without getting caught. Imagine being invited to a royal banquet and having to clutch your purse the entire time, because the king of the nation is trying to hustle you for your loose change just for the thrill of it. 3. Benito Mussolini had an ego so fragile that he turned international diplomacy into a weird CrossFit session just to prove a point. He was so terrified of looking weak that he would randomly drop to the floor during serious meetings to crank out 50 push-ups while foreign ambassadors just stood there awkwardly watching him grunt. He also banned any photos of himself wearing glasses because he thought they made him look too nerdy, and he officially lied about his height by exactly 1 inch. The man ran a fascist empire but was basically just an insecure teenager who stuffs tissues in his shoes to look taller for a date. It is hard to be intimidated by a dictator when you know he is secretly worried that his spectacles make him look like a librarian instead of a warrior. 4. Kim Jong Il took the concept of being a picky eater to a level of paranoia that was honestly just exhausting for everyone involved. He employed an entire team of women whose only professional job description was to sit with tweezers and inspect every single grain of rice served to him to ensure they were absolutely identical. If a grain was slightly too small or misshapen, it was thrown out immediately. He also refused to eat food cooked by anyone who looked sad, so his kitchen staff had to chop vegetables while maintaining creepy, forced smiles just so the dear leader would not think his lunch tasted like negative emotions. It is the kind of behavior you expect from a spoiled child, not a grown man with nuclear weapons who demands that his carbohydrates be geometrically perfect before he puts them in his mouth. 5. Idi Amin of Uganda had a habit that made him look like he was auditioning for a one-man theater show in his own office. He would spend hours having loud, heated arguments with empty chairs, switching his voice to act out both sides of the conversation. He genuinely believed he was receiving military advice from the ghosts of dead British officers, so his aides would walk in and find him screaming at furniture. Imagine trying to run a country when your top military advisor is literally a sofa that you think is a colonial ghost with a fake British officer's name. He would actually implement policies based on these hallucinated chats, meaning the fate of the nation was often decided by what an imaginary friend told him during an intense staring contest with a wooden chair while his cabinet watched in horror. 6. Christian VII of Denmark was technically the king, but his behavior was more like a hyperactive child who had too much sugar. He had a bizarre habit of playing leapfrog with his high-ranking diplomats. When foreign dignitaries would bow low out of respect, the king would take that as an invitation to physically jump over their backs like he was on a playground. Imagine being a serious ambassador trying to discuss a peace treaty, bending down to show submission, and suddenly having the monarch of the nation vault over your spine while giggling. He also enjoyed slapping people in the face during card games, treating the royal court like a chaotic frat house. His ministers had to spend half their time trying to stop him from doing acrobatic stunts during serious government discussions. 7. Peter the Great of Russia was not just a czar. He was an amateur dentist with a terrifying lack of training and a bag full of rusty tools. He developed a weird obsession with pulling teeth and would carry his dental instruments everywhere he went, constantly scanning people's mouths. If a servant, a noble, or even a random passerby so much as frowned, Peter would decide they had a toothache and forcefully extract the tooth right there on the spot. He kept the pulled teeth in a sack as trophies, which is the behavior of a creepy villain, not a monarch. Imagine having to smile with a mouthful of pain because if you complain, the emperor will enthusiastically stick pliers in your mouth and call it a royal medical procedure. He truly thought he was helping, but everyone else just saw him as a giant with pliers. 8. King Ludwig II of Bavaria hated socializing so much that he invented a way to eat dinner without ever seeing a human face. He installed a mechanical dining table in his castles that could be lowered down through the floor into the kitchen, loaded with food, and raised back up just so he could avoid saying thank you to a waiter. But he was not eating alone. He had a habit of commanding his servants to set the table for 3 or 4 invisible guests, usually dead French kings like Louis XIV. He would sit there for hours having lively conversations with empty chairs, toasting to ghosts while his confused staff listened from the other side of the door wondering if he was crazy or just very lonely. It is the ultimate socially awkward power move for a king. 9. Charles VI of France had a mental condition that makes modern anxiety look like a walk in the park. He developed a terrifying delusion that his entire body was made of fragile glass and that he would shatter into 1,000,000 pieces if anyone bumped into him. Because of this, he developed a habit of wearing special clothing reinforced with iron rods, turning himself into a walking metal cage. He also refused to let anyone touch him and would scream in terror if a servant got too close. Imagine trying to run a medieval kingdom while being absolutely convinced that you are basically a human light bulb that could break if you sit down too hard on the throne. This meant he could not even be hugged or handled by his own doctors without a full-blown panic attack. 10. Mao Zedong completely rejected the idea of a normal office and decided that pants were optional for running a superpower. He developed a habit of working almost exclusively from his massive, custom-made wooden bed, sometimes refusing to get out of it for weeks at a time. He would hold high-level government meetings, read top-secret reports, and eat his meals while lounging in his pajamas, forcing serious diplomats to sit around his mattress like it was a teenage sleepover. He basically pioneered the work-from-home lifestyle decades before it was cool, but instead of sending emails, he had terrified generals standing next to his nightstand trying to discuss nuclear strategy while the leader of the nation rolled over, scratched himself, and ignored them in favor of his pillows. 11. Nicolae Ceaușescu of Romania had a germ phobia that would make a hospital sterilization team look completely relaxed. He was so terrified of being poisoned by physical contact that he had a bizarre habit of washing his hands with raw alcohol immediately after touching anything. If he shook hands with a foreign diplomat, he would frantically scrub his skin with this stinging spirit right in front of them, making the meeting incredibly awkward. But his clothing habit was even more wasteful. He refused to wear the same suit twice, ordering his staff to burn his tailored clothes after a single use because he was convinced that invisible assassins could impregnate the fabric with slow-acting toxins through the threads. His entire life was a giant, expensive attempt to stay in a sterile bubble of paranoia. 12. Turkmenbashi had a vanity project that got completely out of hand when he decided that humans were not the only ones who needed to read his book. He actually encouraged citizens to read his book, the Runima, aloud to their livestock and pets because he believed animals could absorb his wisdom and become better creatures. So you had people sitting in barns reading philosophy to confused cows just to stay out of trouble. To top it off, he only drank milk from white horses because he thought it was a magic potion for eternal youth, essentially running the country on dairy superstition and bedtime stories for goats. It is the ultimate ego trip when you think your writing is so good that even a chicken needs to hear Chapter 3 to reach spiritual enlightenment. Otherwise, the farm is just not patriotic enough. 13. King James I of England had a personal hygiene routine that would make a medieval peasant feel like a clean freak. He developed a deep, irrational fear of water and believed that washing his skin would open his pores to diseases and evil spirits. Because of this, he had a lifelong habit of never taking a bath or even washing his hands before meals. Instead, he would occasionally rub the tips of his fingers with a slightly damp napkin and call it a day. His clothes were worn for months at a time until they literally started to rot and fall off his body in pieces. Imagine being a high-ranking diplomat forced to stand downwind of the king while he excitedly talks to you, realizing that the most powerful man in Britain smells like a dumpster that has been sitting in the sun for a week. 14. Fidel Castro was known for his long speeches, but his daily eating habits were purely gluttonous, specifically when it came to dairy. The Cuban leader had an addiction to ice cream that bordered on biological impossibility. He would reportedly eat up to 18 scoops of ice cream after lunch as a standard routine, not a dare. He was so obsessed with milk that he tried to breed super cows for his own personal supply, and would spend hours talking to foreign diplomats not about Cold War politics, but about the specific texture of yogurt. He even founded a state-run ice cream parlor that was essentially a shrine to his own sweet tooth, proving that you can run a revolution and still have the diet of a 5-year-old at a birthday party who just discovered the dessert table. 15. Napoleon Bonaparte conquered Europe, but he spent a suspicious amount of time boiling himself like a lobster. He had a daily habit of taking scalding hot baths that lasted for hours, often demanding the water be kept at temperatures that would make a normal person scream. But here is the kicker. He refused to stop working. He would force his poor secretaries to sit in the steam-filled bathroom, trying to take dictation on soggy paper while the emperor splashed around in the tub. Imagine trying to discuss serious military strategy and map borders while your boss is naked and playing with a sponge in a cloud of hot steam. It shows that even a legendary military genius could not resist the urge to procrastinate by spending 3 hours in the bubbles while his staff choked on the humidity. 16. Ne Win, the dictator of Burma, made decisions based entirely on numerology and superstition rather than economics. He had a daily habit of walking backwards across bridges because a wizard told him it was the only way to confuse evil spirits that were following him. But his obsession with the number 9 destroyed the economy. He canceled all banknotes that were not divisible by 9, simply because 9 was his lucky number. People woke up to find their money worthless just because the dictator had a weird math fetish. Imagine going to the store and realizing you cannot buy bread because your cash does not fit the ruler's favorite multiplication table. He literally gambled the financial survival of an entire nation on whether a number felt spiritually correct to him that morning. 17. Adolf Hitler is often depicted as a disciplined health nut, but his daily medical routine was actually a chemical disaster zone. His personal doctor, Theodor Morell, was essentially a quack who treated the dictator's chronic issues with pills that contained actual strychnine, which is a key ingredient in rat poison. To deal with the stomach problems caused by these drugs, Hitler was then injected with extracts taken from the reproductive organs of bulls and pigs. So the leader who claimed to be the pinnacle of human evolution was habitually walking around full of poison and animal fluids, suffering from bloating and cramps, while his doctor kept prescribing more substances to counter the side effects. He was basically a walking experiment in bad science, worse medicine, and complete self-delusion. 18. Catherine the Great ran Russia with an iron fist and a caffeine addiction that would kill a modern barista. Her morning habit involved drinking coffee so strong it was basically thick engine sludge. She required her kitchen staff to use an entire pound of coffee beans to brew just 5 cups of liquid. If a guest was polite enough to accept a cup from the Empress, they would usually suffer heart palpitations and cold sweats for the rest of the day, while she sipped away calmly. She was essentially vibrating through her royal duties, running an empire while absolutely wired on a lethal dose of caffeine that could probably fuel a rocket ship. It is amazing she had the focus to expand the Russian borders when she was likely seeing sounds and hearing colors from all that espresso. 19. Manuel Noriega of Panama tried to project the image of a tough military strongman, but his pockets were full of superstitious trinkets that made him look ridiculous. He was terrified of the evil eye, so he developed a habit of wearing red underwear, but not in the normal way. He would place a pair of red underpants inside his shoes because he believed it would ward off his enemies and keep his power secure. When his headquarters were finally raided, soldiers found a bizarre collection that included a bucket of dried blood for rituals and a teddy bear dressed in a tiny camouflage uniform. It is hard to take a general seriously when you know he is habitually walking around with lucky lingerie stuffed in his combat boots to fight off bad vibes from the universe. 20. King Zog. The first of Albania had a smoking habit that defies the laws of biology and lung capacity. The man was reportedly smoking up to 200 cigarettes every single day, which mathematically means he was lighting a new one every few minutes, effectively breathing more smoke than oxygen. He was rarely seen without a cigarette, even during formal ceremonies, turning the royal palace into a permanent fog bank. It is honestly impressive that he had time to rule the country between puffs. He was basically a human chimney wearing a crown, and he likely spent more of the national budget on tobacco than on infrastructure, single-handedly keeping the tobacco industry in business while turning his lungs into solid asphalt just to maintain his cool exterior. 21. Kim Il-sung was so terrified of aging that he turned his health routine into a bizarre science fiction experiment. He established a research center staffed by top doctors whose only job was to make him live to 100. They recommended that laughter was the best medicine, so he developed a habit of forcing his staff to perform comedy sketches and bring in adorable children just to make him giggle. But it got weirder because he started getting blood transfusions from young, healthy citizens in their 20s, believing their fresh blood would reverse his aging process. He was essentially a vampire grandpa running a country, siphoning the youth from his people while watching bad slapstick comedy to keep his wrinkles away, proving that absolute power makes you lose your mind. 22. Emperor Nero was basically the original annoying theater kid, but with absolute power to hold an audience hostage. He developed a habit of forcing thousands of citizens to attend his personal concerts, where he would sing and play the lyre for hours on end. The catch was that nobody was allowed to leave the theater for any reason while he was performing. It got so bad that women literally gave birth in the audience because they were trapped, and men would pretend to die just so they could be carried out by undertakers to escape his terrible voice. Imagine being so bad at karaoke that your friends have to fake a cardiac arrest just to get away from your microphone, while you keep hitting high notes thinking you are a musical legend. 23. Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire had an ego that literally defied gravity and common sense. He mandated that the state-run evening news began every single night with a surreal video sequence of him descending from the clouds like a majestic African god. He watched this daily, nodding in approval at his own holiness. But his fashion habit was even stricter because he passed a law making it illegal for anyone else in the country to wear a leopard skin hat. He essentially trademarked an animal pattern for his own head, meaning if you wore a fuzzy hat, you were committing treason. He wanted to be the only cool cat in the jungle, quite literally, enforcing a monopoly on spotting fashion while his image floated through the sky every night at dinner time. 24. Francisco Macias Nguema of Equatorial Guinea did not trust economists, bankers, or common sense, so he decided to become the world's worst personal safe. He closed down the national bank and physically moved the country's entire cash reserves into his small village home, storing millions of dollars in suitcases and bags right under his bamboo bed. He slept on top of the national budget every night. Because of the humid jungle climate and his lack of basic storage skills, a huge portion of the money simply rotted away or was eaten by insects. He essentially bankrupted his nation because he wanted to treat the economy like a paranoid grandpa hiding cash in a mattress, proving that greed and stupidity are a very expensive combination for an entire country. 25. Nikita Khrushchev developed an obsession with corn that went way beyond a dietary preference. It was a full-blown agricultural mania. After visiting the US, he decided corn was the answer to everything and developed a habit of carrying ears of corn around like they were holy relics. He would enthusiastically wave corn cobs at confused diplomats, talk about corn for hours during serious Politburo meetings, and demanded that corn be planted in freezing Siberia, where it obviously died. He was basically a fanatical door-to-door vegetable salesman who just happened to have access to nuclear launch codes, trying to turn the frozen Soviet tundra into a farm in Iowa, even as the plants turned into ice cubes the moment they hit the ground. 26. Caligula, the Roman emperor, had a best friend that he spoiled more than any human being in the empire. But the problem was that his friend was a horse named Incitatus. Caligula developed a habit of treating this animal like a high-ranking politician. He gave the horse a marble stall, an ivory manger, and purple blankets, which was the color of royalty. But it gets crazier because he ordered his servants to feed the horse oats mixed with gold flakes, and even invited the beast to dinner parties, where it would dine at the table with terrified senators. He was literally moments away from making the horse an official consul of Rome, proving that nepotism works even if you have hooves and a tail, provided the boss is crazy enough. 27. Rafael Trujillo of the Dominican Republic had a narcissism habit that made him treat God like a junior business partner. He ordered that every church in the country display a specific neon sign that read, "God in heaven, Trujillo on earth." He genuinely insisted on sharing top billing with the Almighty. He also renamed the capital city after himself, renamed the highest mountain after himself, and even forced car license plates to carry slogans praising him. You literally could not drive to the grocery store or say a prayer without giving a mandatory shout-out to the dictator, which is the ultimate level of needy corporate branding for a guy who was clearly terrified that someone, somewhere, might forget his name for 5 minutes. 28. Hastings. Kamuzu. Banda of Malawi was obsessed with hair to a level that makes modern fashion police look lazy. He had a strict daily habit of inspecting the scalps of men because he believed long hair was a sign of rebellion. He officially banned long hair on men across the entire nation, but he took it a step further at the borders. He stationed government barbers at the airport who would forcibly cut the hair of tourists the moment they stepped off the plane if their hair was deemed too long. Imagine flying 12 hours for a vacation only to be greeted by a government agent with rusty scissors who gives you a mandatory bowl cut before you can even pick up your luggage or find a taxi to your hotel. 29. Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines ran his dictatorship based entirely on numerology because he was convinced the number 7 was his lucky charm. He developed a habit of delaying major national decisions, signing laws, or even holding elections until the date had a 7 in it, or was divisible by 7. He was so obsessed with this superstition that he would reschedule massive events if the math did not add up to his lucky number. It is honestly terrifying to think that the fate of millions of people often depended on whether the dictator checked his calendar and decided the vibes were mathematically correct for the day, essentially making national security a game of bingo where the house always wins. 30. Domitian, the Emperor of Rome, had absolute power over the known world, but he spent his daily office hours doing something that would worry a school guidance counselor. He had a compulsive habit of locking himself in his room for hours, not to study maps or laws, but to catch flies and stab them with a sharp stylus. He was literally a serial killer of insects. It became such a well-known routine that when a visitor once asked a guard if anyone was inside with the emperor, the guard sarcastically replied, "No, not even a fly." Imagine the Senate waiting for a decree while the most powerful man on earth is giggling alone in his room, playing a gladiator deathmatch with a housefly on his desk while the empire runs itself. 31. Frederick William I of Prussia was not interested in art or gold. His collecting habit was entirely focused on giant men. He was obsessed with building a regiment of Potsdam giants, comprised solely of soldiers over 6 feet tall. He treated these guys like rare Pokemon cards, trading diamonds and even entire villages to other monarchs just to get one tall guy in return. He loved them so much that he refused to ever send them into battle because he did not want his beautiful collection to get damaged. Instead, he forced them to march through his bedroom when he was sick to cheer him up, which is basically playing with living action figures because you have the flu and way too much power. 32. Sultan Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire had a sensory obsession that bankrupted the treasury. He was absolutely addicted to the feeling of sable fur and decided that he wanted to touch it everywhere. He developed a habit of covering entire walls, floors, and even ceilings of the palace with expensive furs because he believed it soothed his nerves. He eventually imposed a tax on his subjects, demanding they send him furs instead of money. He was essentially living inside a giant soft hamster cage made of luxury pelts, forcing the entire population to hunt weasels just so he could rub his face on the furniture during diplomatic meetings, while everyone else tried to ignore the fact that the palace was shedding. 33. Peter III of Russia was technically a grown man and an emperor, but mentally he was a toddler with a very expensive toy box. He had a daily habit of ignoring his wife, Catherine the Great, to play with hundreds of wooden toy soldiers on their marital bed. He took these games deadly seriously. One day, he found a rat in his room that had chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers. Instead of just killing it, he held a full formal military court-martial for the rat, found it guilty of treason, and constructed a tiny gallows to execute it. He spent his time dispensing justice to rodents, while his wife was outside actually planning how to take over the massive empire he was ignoring, to play with dolls. 34. Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China was so obsessed with living forever that he accidentally destroyed his own health, with a very toxic wellness routine. He demanded that his doctors create an elixir of immortality, and they eventually prescribed him pills made of mercury. He developed a daily habit of consuming this liquid metal, genuinely believing it was turning him into a god with eternal life. He was essentially drinking thermometer fluid while his organs slowly shut down from heavy metal poisoning. It is the ultimate irony that the man who spent his entire fortune building the terracotta army to protect him in the afterlife died early because he thought drinking metallic poison was a smart longevity hack. 35. Empress Dowager Cixi of China had a sensory obsession that required an entire agricultural sector to maintain. She absolutely loved the smell of apples, but she did not eat them. Instead, she had a habit of keeping massive bowls filled with thousands of fresh apples in every room of her palace, just to act as natural air fresheners. She required over 150,000 apples per year just to keep her rooms smelling fruity. Her staff had to constantly rotate the fruit before it rotted, meaning she was wasting tons of food while her people starved, all because she wanted her living room to smell like an orchard without ever taking a bite, which is the ultimate example of being out of touch with reality. 36. Louis XIV of France, known as the Sun King, turned his morning routine into a literal spectator sport that makes modern reality TV look shy. He developed a habit called the levee, where getting dressed was an official state ceremony attended by over 100 people. Nobles would crowd into his bedroom just to watch him put on his pants and wig. It was not just watching, it was a hierarchy. The highest-ranking duke got the honor of handing the king his shirt, while others just stood there clapping as he put on his socks. Imagine waking up with crust in your eyes and having a room full of people staring at you in silence, waiting for you to brush your teeth so they can applaud your dental hygiene. 37. Tsar Paul I of Russia was essentially a fashion police officer with absolute power and zero taste. He developed a deep, irrational hatred for round hats because he associated them with French revolutionaries. He did not just dislike them, he made it a daily habit to inspect the streets from his carriage. If he saw anyone wearing a round hat, his soldiers would snatch it off their head and shred it to pieces right there on the sidewalk. He also banned the word citizen and society, forcing people to change their entire vocabulary just to avoid annoying him. It is the historical equivalent of a manager firing you because he hates the font you used in an email, except the manager is the emperor and he can take your hat and your freedom. 38. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany had a hobby that went way beyond letting off steam and turned into compulsive deforestation. After he was forced to abdicate, he developed a daily habit of chopping down trees. We are not talking about a little firewood for the winter. The man personally chopped down over 140,000 trees during his exile in the Netherlands. He would spend hours every single day hacking away at the forest with a single arm, destroying entire landscapes just to stay busy. His estate staff eventually had to import wood from other places just so he would have something to destroy, turning him into a one-man beaver army that was more obsessed with timber than he ever was with military strategy. 39. General Santa Anna of Mexico had an ego so massive that he treated his own body parts like national heroes that deserved their own holidays. After his leg was amputated during a battle, he developed a habit of mourning the lost limb as if it were a fallen soldier. He eventually ordered a full-state funeral for the severed leg, which is easily one of the weirdest events in history. He had the leg dug up, placed in a crystal vase, and paraded through the streets of Mexico City with full military honors and cannon salutes. Thousands of people had to stand in the sun and salute a decomposing foot. It is the ultimate narcissistic move to force an entire nation to pay their respects to a piece of your anatomy. 40. King George III of England is famous for losing the American colonies, but his personal habits were losing touch with reality entirely toward the end of his reign. He developed a habit of stopping his royal carriage in the middle of the countryside to have long, polite conversations with oak trees. He genuinely believed one specific tree was the King of Prussia and would shake one of its branches as if it were a hand, discussing international politics with the bark. His servants had to stand there awkwardly while the monarch negotiated treaties with a plant. It is a sad but bizarre image of the most powerful man in the British Empire getting silent treatment from a tree and assuming it was just being a tough negotiator. 41. Emperor Elagabalus of Rome was essentially a chaotic teenager with a massive budget and a very mean sense of humor. He developed a habit of hosting elaborate dinner parties where the main goal was to play the world's most annoying pranks on his guests. He would frequently serve food made of painted wood or stone just to watch people break their teeth trying to be polite. But his favorite move was the fart cushion. He invented a version of the whoopee cushion using leather bellows and would hide them under the seats of the most serious senators in Rome. Just picture a group of powerful men in silk robes trying to discuss imperial taxes, while the emperor is giggling like a madman every time a loud fake flatulence sound echoes through the hall. 42. Francisco Franco of Spain ran his country like a paranoid night shift that never ended. He developed a bizarre habit of staying awake until dawn and forcing his ministers to remain on call all night just in case he felt like talking. Some nights, he summoned them at 3 or 4 in the morning for absolutely nothing urgent, just to prove he could. Exhausted officials would stumble into the palace half asleep while Franco calmly discussed trivial matters, then dismissed them without decisions. Spain was effectively governed by a man who treated sleep deprivation as a loyalty test, proving that absolute power means never having to respect anyone's circadian rhythm but your own. 43. King George IV of the United Kingdom was an extreme hoarder who treated his romantic life like a very creepy museum project. He developed a bizarre habit of collecting locks of hair from every single woman he ever had a relationship with, keeping them in individual envelopes labeled with their names. When he died, his staff found a massive cabinet containing over 7,000 tiny pouches of human hair tucked away in his private rooms. It is the kind of behavior that would get you a starring role on a true crime documentary today. But back then, he was just the King of England with a very hairy hobby. He spent his evenings organizing his collection like a deranged librarian, proving that even a monarch can have the personal habits of a haunted doll. 44. François Papa-Doc Duvalier of Haiti had a habit of letting numerology run his entire government, and he was specifically obsessed with the number 22. He believed this number was his magical source of power and refused to make any major decisions, sign laws, or even leave his palace unless the date was the 22nd of the month. He took this obsession to a global level when John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd. Duvalier actually claimed that he had spent the entire morning performing a voodoo ritual to curse the American president, taking full credit for the event because the math of the date matched his favorite number. Imagine a world leader sitting in his office with a calendar, ignoring international crises just because the date did not add up to 22. Now here's the real problem. These aren't all of them. History is full of powerful figures with routines too strange, too disturbing, or too embarrassing to make the textbooks. So tell me in the comments, which leader, dictator, or ruler did we miss? And what was their most unhinged habit? If you know one, drop it. And if this list surprised you, hit like and subscribe, because this rabbit hole only gets darker.